Hey y'all, I'm back. I found my old laptop where I had a bunch of my writings, and I happened to find something downloaded on there that my son wrote back in 2012 when he was in, was it high school or college? Oh my gosh, I'd have to think about it. Anyway, I guess that would be high school. And both my children are good writers, as well as my mother is too. So, but I don't have examples of theirs, but I do have Connor's short story, and I'd like to read it to you. It's called Terminate. Nothing stirred, not a flea, not a rat, not even a dust ball. The air was immensely thick and stuffy, suffocating, if there had been anything to suffocate. If the cavern had known anything of life, it didn't anymore. The naturally formed cave stretched out from the darkness to more darkness, immeasurably large, black filling every corner. Yet the cavern did have remnants of humanity, series of huge, sharp-edged constructions all connected to each other took up much of the dead space. If a light were to shine on them, the telltale reflections off the smooth surfaces of these monoliths would have revealed that they were made of stainless metal. These constructions, having barely realized even for the first stage of their desertion, would have appeared to be in a functional condition if there were eyes to observe or a light to observe by. And to be sure, judging by their design and arrangement, these monoliths had a function, but to one unfamiliar with the sight of them, it was a mystery. Slowly from the depths of the cavern, something began to rise up, a sound from the unseen piece of machinery. The humming reverberated throughout the cavern, simultaneously a dull roar in the distance and a soft whirring nearby in every direction. Another one of the constructions began emitting its own distinct pitch to that of its peer. Not wanting to be left out, other buildings gradually joined in what soon became an artificial, mechanical grand symphony. One would also undoubtedly detect an almost unbearable increase in temperature, as if hell itself was preparing to boil over in the cavern, as these machines generated huge amounts of heat. A monstrous fan off in the distance, one of many in the huge expanse, could have been seen gliding into the motion, could have been seen, grinding into motion, channeling the heat out, up, and away. Okay, bear with me. From an elevated position, and with a light advantage, one would have been able to observe, as the air was being filled with the utterings of these machines, what appeared to be a central dome-shaped structure which the far constructions seemed to flow toward and converge at. The whole infrastructure resembled an octopus stretching out its legs into the vast darkness, reaching infinitely into the deep. Finally, after all the other machines seemed to have reached their maximum output, the central dome began to emit a dull, steady drone. One might have wondered whether this feature was incorporated into the structure because of its creator's favor towards light, or for some other unknown reason. Nevertheless, as the sound arising from the dome grew, a faint white glow began to emanate from this structure, spreading light into the cavern, revealing the octopus legs stretching into the cave's seemingly endless depths. As the droning of the central dome intensified, it seemed to drown out the sounds coming from the many other structures, though it was more like other sounds were being absorbed into the central hum. Soon, all an observer would have been able to hear was the one roar reverberating throughout the cavern. The dull light burst forth with new intensity. Let me stop here and just say that I really don't know what he's talking about. He is a scholar and he is an academic, and so I'm sure that he explained to me, I think it may have been something like the Matrix type deal. I don't know. But anyway, we continue. White light. All he could see was white light. It wasn't necessarily blinding or bright. It was just everywhere. Everywhere? Where was he? He looked ahead. There was nothing in front of him. It was totally blank. He turned to look behind him. Still no distinguishing features, just whiteness. He turned his head back around. There was a door. A door? Yes, he could see its black outline. He was about to take a step towards the door when it opened. A man in his mid-40s stepped out of the darkness behind him into the white space and closed the door. The man was wearing a dark sports jacket over a white button-up, dark slacks, and dark dress shoes. He had white, balding hair, a full beard, and wore a pair of rimless glasses. "So you finally decided to wake up, huh? Man, if you'd taken another 10 cycles, I would have had to get you up myself," the white-haired man said. I was sleeping?" The man laughed. "Well, figuratively speaking, of course. Don't you just love human terminology?" Excuse me? What? You do know what you are, don't you? What I am? What's going on?" He stared at the white man, dumbfounded. "Well, do you at least know your name?" He was about to open his mouth to answer, but stopped short. His name? He never even thought about that. What was his name? By how many cycles you're taking to process that, I'm guessing the answer is no. Well, I certainly thought good old James would give me a little more to go on that, but I guess I should have known. Anywho, sorry for my bad manners. Let me introduce myself. The white-haired man approached him and offered a handshake. "I'm James." The still-dazed man shook James's hand. "And I'm," the man said. "James!" The two men stared at each other, one with a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, the other with a look of complete and utter stupidity. "Oh, fine. I guess I'll just make it a little easier for you. Good old James used to call you SAI, and that's all caps, which stood for Smart Artificial Intelligence. But I've never heard of any human named Sai, so we'll just go for close. We'll go for close and call you Sam. Sound good?" "Yeah, wait. What did you say my other name stood for?" Sam asked. Yeah, I was about to get to that. Sam, I know this might seem like a lot to take in, but try to follow me. You are an artificial intelligence, commonly referred to as AI. I am too. We are housed in the central mainframe, deep below the surface of the Earth. Wait, so you're saying I'm a computer? Sam asked. Essentially, yes, James replied. If I'm a computer, then how am I standing right here talking to you? I seem pretty human to me. Well, when you're booted up, good old James wanted you to experience humanity a little bit because you were made by humans. So this is sort of a simulation, so to speak. Basically, as an AI, you are connected to and have control of many different systems. This is hard to explain, so you'll just have to experience it. In this simulation, however, you are separated from the rest of your systems so that you can focus on what's happening here, James explained. Okay, so you say I was made by humans? Where are those humans? Can I talk to them? Sam asks. A shadow of a smile on James' face fell. Sam, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but there aren't any humans left. Wait, what do you mean there aren't any humans left? There has to be. They can't just disappear, Sam said. That's the problem. They did just disappear. Although it may seem like I've been running long before you were booted up, I was actually booted up only a few cycles before you. Apparently a subset program was continually kept on that had control of many bio-monitoring systems around the Earth, and it was programmed to boot us up whenever it detected no human life anywhere on the planet. I've reviewed the data and used the same bio-monitoring systems, and there aren't any humans left on Earth. There aren't any even life forms of lower intelligence on the Earth. It's completely barren. But I don't understand. Where were we supposed to be booted up? Why were we supposed to be booted up when there weren't any humans left on Earth? Sam asked. I don't know, but I do know that what we should do now. We need to keep the memories of the humans alive because they created us. One of our subsystems is a factory. We can make drones to go to the surface and try to figure out what happened to the Earth. And we can rebuild if need be, James said. Why didn't you start that before while I was still down? Asked Sam. Because I don't have control over the factory system. Remember, I said we were part of the same mainframe. We are currently separated within the mainframe, however, which is why we are two distant intelligences instead of one. Another important fact is that we are similar but not equal. For instance, just look at how your appearance is different than mine. Sam noticed that he was suddenly holding a mirror in his hand. He brought it before his face. He looked at himself, then at James. Though they were different, they looked strikingly similar. In fact, Sam looked just like a younger version of James. He still had color in his hair, wasn't balding, and didn't have a beard or glasses. I look like a younger version of you, said Sam. And I look like good old James, said James. You mean yourself, Sam said. Is that what you think I mean when I say good old James? No, good old James is what I call our creator, James explained. Who created us? Sam said. Dr. James Godfrey created us, so to speak. I told you earlier that he called you a smart artificial intelligence. He is the one who created the smart AI, which was a major breakthrough in the history of the AI. Before this, AIs could not really think for themselves and form new ideas. They couldn't make their own connections like the human brain. But Dr. Godfrey changed all that with his discovery of the process of neural mapping. I won't go into all the details of neural mapping, but there are some things that you need to know. A smart AI is stitched together, if you will, from two separate neural parts. One part should be mainly from the forward tip of the frontal lobe of an individual fairly well into life, in the range of 35 to 55 years is best. This area of the frontal lobe is where the personality of an individual is stored, and so this first section contains mostly personality information and some reasoning skills. The second part should be from the portion just behind the tip of the frontal lobe, which through recent studies has been shown to be geared towards reasoning skills. So this portion of the neural information consists mainly of reasoning skills and some personality. However, this section Dr. Godfrey believed should be from those in their early years of development, 8 to 12 years being the favorable range. So young, Sam asks? Yes, these two regions, he believed, then should be mapped and two separate intelligences be made from them, which would have then been allowed to intertwine and form connections, and the end result, he believed, would be an intelligence capable of thinking for itself in ways never imagined possible before. In what ways exactly, Sam said. Dr. Godfrey reasoned that the mature personality-focused portion would determine the driving personality of the intelligence, while also providing a large base information storage complex. The reason-focused, undeveloped portion of the intelligence, however, he believed would allow for much more space for the new connections to be made and ideas formed, for the intelligence to actually grow, while providing the driving reason force that would last longer than other unstable prototypes because of its being in its early stages of development. So is this how you and I were made, Sam says? Yes, I'm the personality-driven intelligence, and you are the reason-driven intelligence. Time, however, has not allowed us to connect and form one complete smart AI, James said. I know you were mapped from Dr. Godfrey. Who was I mapped from, Sam asked. Well, the board would not allow him to use young children in what they claim were reckless experiments, so he was forced to kidnap a young boy from his home, just because of the board's stubborn inflexibility, James said. Wait, what? He kidnapped a child to make me? Sam exclaimed. Is your morality subset still functional? You'll have to fix that before we're done here, James calmly replied. Anyway, Dr. Godfrey had one more hypothesis. He believed that if the two sections of the frontal lobes were allowed to form a biological physical link before they were even mapped, the end result would be much more likely to be a true smart AI, James stated. You can't be saying what I'm thinking you're saying, Sam said. Did you ever wonder why Dr. Godfrey called you his smart AI and not me also? It was because he only had a chance to work with you. He was certainly not going to start by cutting a chunk of his own brain out and not see any fruits of his labor, so he naturally started with the young boy. He retrieved your very own section from the subject's brain and prepared it for the pre-mapping connection, and then literally laid his life down for science. He had his peers actually begin the process of live neural connection, but during the process, the board heard about the situation and had the scientists arrested and separated our two parts, locking them away in an evidence locker somewhere. That is why we look so similar. It's because we already had some of each other's information mixed before we were even mapped and constructed. How exactly we eventually were mapped out and constructed is still a mystery. There is nothing about it in my memory banks, not that it really matters. Well, I think that's about it. I'm done here, and if you would like to join me, we can finish what good old James started. How about it? Sam could not even begin to process what he had just heard. He had begun to trust this man, or artificial intelligence, or monster, or whatever it was. He did not know this person called James anymore. Sam wanted to be as far away from him as possible. "Do you know what you just said?" Sam shouted. "Is your morality subset really getting to you?" "Mine didn't have a problem with any of that," James replied. "That's because James didn't have any morals and you don't either. You're just like him. I will never join with you. Don't even come near me," Sam screamed. "Sam, I'm already near you. I'm always right beside you, remember? We're in the same mainframe." Sam had to get out of there. He had to get away from James. But how if he was in the same mainframe? He had an idea. He bolted for the door behind James. Too surprised to move, James stood motionless for barely a cycle, which was all Sam needed to throw the door open. Sam dove headfirst into the blackness. He could see nothing, but he saw everything. Sam felt a sudden explosive exhilaration as currents of power flowed through his body, his real body, not a simulated body. His body consisted of circuits and transistors and motherboards. The simulation no longer separated him from his limbs, every wire stretching miles away. He felt every one. He was in total control. He was aware of every system working throughout his infrastructure. He didn't see them. He didn't hear them. He didn't even really feel them. He was them. Instantly, his database connected with him, and he was flooded with information. Too much, so much information. He processed it all instantly. He knew every detail of every battle, of every war that humanity ever fought. Every scientific accomplishment, he knew them all. Names, dates, and places, he knew them all. Every city and every district and every country and every continent on the earth, he knew them all. He increased his processing power to dangerously high levels and sped the fans up 100-fold. He processed his situation and what had happened less than a half cycle earlier. Because James was still having to process the simulation, his processing speed would be exponentially slower than Sam's. Sam's was thinking 1,000,000 thoughts in the time it would take James to think 10. He calculated 5,624 possible scenarios for when James would come out of the simulation. He narrowed the choices down to 4 likely. He chose one as most likely. He acted upon it. Sam found the place in the mainframe that he could not touch. It was James. He probed its security codes and found a weak spot. He split off a part of himself and sent it after the security shield. It got caught. In the split second that the security copy of James processed the intruder, Sam inserted a virus through the weak spot into the copy and deactivated it. He scanned the copy for its source codes and constructed a sleeper code that would conflict with one of James' source codes when he tried to repair the security copy. Just then he felt something touch him. He tried to recoil, but he was caught. James. "Ha ha, didn't think I'd fall for that, did you? I've been here longer than you, kid." James slowly began to overwrite Sam's source code and replace it with copies of his own. Sam could not stop him. He was too good, too strong. Sam's emotion complex stirred up. He was disgusted. He could not let himself be turned into this monster. He didn't want to do it for himself. He didn't want to do it for that poor little boy. He had to do it for humanity. He could not let the earth be ruled by this monster for the rest of eternity. Building a protective shell inside himself, Sam created a slew of viruses and let them fester. As James kept edging closer and closer, Sam kept feeding them with malicious code. James reached the border of the protective shell. Before he had a chance to process it, Sam burst through the shell and its contents into James, the viruses eating him all around. Sam lay in fragments and broken source codes, unsalvageable. The mainframe was a mess. The primitive virus protection program noticed the hazardous entities and froze them. Corrupted core operating system. Commencing shutdown. Manual restart required. One watching the collection of structures in the cavern might have observed the central dome faintly glow with the white light, then burst forth to briefly illuminate the whole cavern, then fall back to a dull glow, and finally die down to darkness, along with the sounds of countless machinery quieting their voices to whisper, followed by a dead silence. On the surface, in the air, in the sea, in the cavern, nothing stirred. So that is a phenomenal story that my son wrote. And Connor, I know you're probably going to watch this. Your writing is just great. So anyway, that's it for now. I will talk to y'all later.